memory I have. Dave Conyers is home and doing better, but still got a week or two to go before he's back on his feet. Now, anybody else? Okay. Brother Jim Hammonds, would you lead us in a prayer, please?
Father, we're mindful of those that were mentioned this morning who are visiting doctors, who are recovering from surgery. We are thankful for the doctors and nurses that you bless us with and the knowledge. We pray, Heavenly Father, that as they recover, that we can be encouraged to them and they can recover in as little pain as possible and their health be restored. We pray especially for Sister Dot as she's about to go into chemotherapy. We pray that you keep her comforted and be with Brother Fuller as she goes through this. We're so thankful for all the blessings that you do give us. And we know even through the hard times that we have more blessings than we can count. We pray that we lean upon that. We're thankful for your word. We're so thankful for the opportunity we have to study that. As always, Heavenly Father, may we stand on your word and your word alone. In Jesus' name, amen.
I did forget one thing. I believe we are truly blessed at this congregation through Terry's illness. We've got 6 different men already lined up for the rest of this month to take care of that, all volunteers. So encourage each of you to come back and listen to what they have to say. John chapter 4. John chapter 4. When therefore the Lord knew how the Pharisees had heard that Jesus made and baptized more disciples than John, and that, excuse me, that sounds like a confusing verse. Who's Lord here? Who we're talking about? Because it says, when the Lord knew, and then it says that Jesus had made. Who's Lord? Jesus. It's just their way of speaking then. So if you, as a matter of fact, I believe it's the ESV that even says, and I might be wrong on this, but I believe that one is translated, when therefore Jesus knew how the Pharisees had heard that Jesus made and baptized more than John. But there's one translation out there that phrases it that way. But that's what it's talking about. That's what it's talking about here. Though Jesus himself baptized not, but his disciples. All right. The first verse there says that Jesus made and baptized more than John. And then the second verse says that Jesus did not baptize himself. How do we reconcile those two verses? Well, that's one point. But let us say that based on me being on a cane and everything, and I happen to be preaching, and somebody responds to my call or to God's call, the invitation, and they don't want me in there falling down with them. So, and somebody steps in to do the actual physical baptizing. Could you still not say that it was me?
We've heard that from gospel meetings for years. They say, Brother so-and-so came and preached the gospel meeting, and there were 10 baptisms, but there might have been a parent that came up and baptized their child instead of him, but you don't break it down.
You don't break it down. So go to 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians, Jim, you're kind of quick with the Bible. 1 Corinthians 1 in chapters 11 through 15. 1 Corinthians 1, 11 through 15.
For it has been declared unto me of you, my brethren, by them which are the house of Chloe, there is contention among you. Now this I say, that every one of you saith, I am of Paul, I am of Apollos, and I am of Cephas, and I of Christ. Is Christ divided? Was Paul crucified for you? Or were you baptized in the name of Paul? I thank God that I baptized none of you but Crispus and Gaius, lest any should say that I had baptized in my own name.
All right, now can you imagine what would have happened if Christ had baptized a handful of people? When the church was just being formed, who would try to take preeminence? What kind of squabble would what kind of squabble would there have been? And you can even look at that today. How many times today does something happen in a congregation and people follow the preacher? You know, who are we supposed to follow? We're supposed to follow who's the head of the church? Christ. That is where that's where it's supposed to be. So you can see how by him deciding not to baptize any, but just do the teaching, he should still get the credit. However, it would create a whole lot less confusion than somebody saying, well, you know, he baptized me. I've got a better right to this than you. So at least that's my opinion of the way things went there. Questions or comments on that section?
Well, it's not easy to see that today. I mean, we have a worldwide denomination. One of their major doctrines is based on this representation of one conversation that Jesus had with Peter. You know, just what Jesus said to Peter, they twisted it, and that's one of their major points. So it wasn't even, that wasn't even the case of him baptizing someone in this conversation. This is how powerful he can use what Christ did, even in a wrong way. They can twist it around.
That's correct. You're talking about the ones that caused Peter the first pope, right? Well, after this, he left Judea and departed again into Galilee. Now, if you put your thinking hats on a minute, where was he more than likely when this conversation was taking place? Because where had he been in the previous chapter? He was in Jerusalem. He was there for the Passover. He had cleansed the temples. He had done a few other things. So as things go through here, when he left Judea, and Jerusalem's in Judea, Judea's the area, he then went to Galilee. Now that's from Jerusalem from the city of Jerusalem to the city of Galilee is somewhere around 70 miles. So we don't know precisely that he was in Jerusalem, but that's a pretty good trek. Why would he go that distance? Why would he go to Galilee? If you look back at verse 1, what was going on? What was the Pharisees all about? What were the Pharisees trying to do to him? The Pharisees were unhappy with him. Now, it's very possible that he went back to Galilee because it's a safe place to be. If you notice that through his ministry, after people started wanting to kill him, when we get to that point, he would always leave areas. Did he leave and find a safe haven because he was afraid or because he was a coward? No. He could have done anything he needed to do to stop any aggravation going on. But to fill his role until his time came, he tried to keep things as calm as he could. He would leave a bad area and go and let things settle down because it was until it was time for him to go to Jerusalem and be crucified, there was no need to stir up a big fuss or a fight. So he went there to find a safe place to be and stay away from the aggravation. And in verse 4, it said he needed to go through Samaria. Now, Samaria was an area that used to belong to Ephraim, Manasseh, half-tribe. So it was between Judea and Galilee. Most of the Jews during that day, when they was making that trek, they would go across the river and go up the other side. They would avoid Samaria altogether because Judea, or the Jews, Well, basically, they detested the Samaritans, if we want to get right down to it. But they were going to go through Samaria, taking a short way. When then cometh he to a city of Samaria, which is called Sychar, near to the parcel of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Genesis 13:19. Joel, you got Genesis 13:19 real quick for me? 33:19. Genesis 33:19.
And he walked a basket of the field, then he spread his tent. And the hand of the children of Hamor, Shechem's father, 100 pieces of money.
Okay. I had him read that because when he bought that parcel of land that they're talking about here, Hamor, Shechem, or Shechem as he called it, the name of Sychar used to be Shechem. So we're talking about the same place, but it's where the well was that they had then. And verse 6 says, Now Jacob's well was there. Jesus, therefore, being wearied with his journey, sat thus on the well, and it was about the 6th hour. Now we've just gone through a little bit of Jewish calendars and Jewish timekeeping. So what is the 6th hour? And I believe that they're working on Jewish time for a couple of reasons. So let's just say it's high noon. And one of the reasons I'm putting it there is, when did the people normally go to get water? Well, it was the woman's work to go get water back in those days. If you recall, how many people met their wives at the well when they were drawing water and things of that nature? So that was one of their roles. But when did they usually go to get the water? In the cool of the evening or the cool of the morning. They didn't go out in the middle of the day. Here, the Samaritan woman goes out in the middle of the day. Why? Or else the others don't want to have anything to do with her because of her lifestyle and all. So here she is out there in the middle of the day. And also the reason I'm putting it at this time is, with Jesus being wearied from his journey, they would start about daybreak, so he had probably already been on the march about 6 hours, so that it was time to take a little rest. So here he meets her about noontime. Here he is about noontime, and then the Samaritan woman to draw water, and Jesus said unto her, Give me to drink. His disciples had gone into the city to buy meat, meaning buy food, not necessarily meat, but food. Then saith the woman of Samaria unto him, How is it that thou, being a Jew, ask drink of me, which am a woman of Samaria? For the Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans. Now, let's find out who the Samaritans were and why the Jews didn't like them that well. 2 Kings, back to Brother Hammond's, if you don't mind. 2 Kings 17 and 24. Yes, sir.
And the king of Assyria brought men from Babylon, and from Cuthah, and from Ava, and from Hamath, and from Sepharvaim, and placed them in the cities of Samaria instead of the children of Israel. And they possessed Samaria and dwelt in the cities thereof.
Notice all those names of people that he did. In other words, the Samaritans were basically just a conglomeration of people. It had been Jewish property, and now it wasn't Jewish property anymore. So there was this animosity between them. Verse 10, Jesus answered and said unto her, If thou knewest the gift of God, and who it is that saith to thee, Give me to drink, thou wouldst have asked of him, and he would have given thee living water. So Jesus immediately speaks to her. He sort of hints at who he is, and then says that he would give her living water. Now, in this region, uh, when they talk about living water, they were talking about flowing water through rivers, streams, and such. It wasn't necessarily, she didn't know at this point that he was talking about spiritual, but it was flowing instead of stagnant or standing water. But he's trying to put things in a way that she's going to be able to understand here in a few minutes. And the woman saith unto him, Sir, thou hast nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. From whence then hast thou that living water? Now, it doesn't specifically say it, but by her question, what would you surmise would be the condition at the well? If you walked up to that well, knowing that her comment was, You have nothing to draw with, what would be the conclusion that you would draw? Brother Golden. Right. But to get to the water, you're going down about 100 feet. Okay. So it's deep, but you don't have anything to draw with, because normally when I was growing up, you'd go to the well and there would be a rope and a bucket on the well. So she says you don't have anything to draw with. And you got to remember all the contention that went on and how many people would share a well, and they'd run people off till they got their water and such. You can just imagine that the well was there, but you had to bring your own equipment, your own rope, your own bucket to draw with. And so she sees that he doesn't have any of that stuff. And he asks him how he's going to get it. Verse 12 says, verse 12 continues with it, Art thou greater than our father Jacob, which gave us the well, and drank thereof himself and his children and his cattle? Now, I find this verse interesting because when I had Brother Hammonds read in Kings, it's a whole conglomeration of people here taking the land away from the Israelites. But now this woman is saying, Our father Jacob gave us this well. That would mean that she was an Israelite. That means that she was one of the, remember the lost tribes, the 10 lost tribes as they're referred to? So even though the king had put all these people there, it is apparently that they didn't replace everybody, that there was still some of that blended in with them, and she knew a little bit about what was going on. Verse 13 says, Jesus answered and said unto her, Whosoever drinketh of this water thirst again, but whosoever drinketh of the water that I shall give him shall never thirst, but the water that I shall give him shall be in him a well of water springing up into everlasting life. Would you not love to be able to have a spring of water that was eternal, that would never run out? And that's what he's telling her here. But we know in that region that wells would come and go. Many of the wells over there that were plentiful years ago are nothing but dust now. So he's trying to explain to her the spiritual by talking to her about the physical also. In verse 15, the woman said unto him, Sir, give me this water that I thirst not, neither come thither to draw. So she wanted that well in her so she wouldn't have to go out there and draw any more water. And then verse 19 through 18, or 16 through 18, Jesus saith unto her, Go, call thy husband, and come hither. The woman answered and said, I have no husband. Jesus answered or said unto her, Thou hast said well, I have no husband. For thou hast had 5 husbands, and he whom thou hast now is not thy husband, and that thou sayest thou truly. So Jesus had sort of put her on the spot by saying, Go get your husband. And now she says she didn't have one. But apparently she was living with one, the 6th one. So uh, the next verse to me is very important, because the woman said unto him, Sir, I perceive that thou art a prophet. She had not yet recognized that he was the Messiah, even though that we find out later that she knows one is coming. She still puts it that he's a prophet. Questions or comments so far? Yeah. And it doesn't bother to go into explanation of why she's on number 6, whether they left her, she left them, or what the situation was. It was just her current condition is. So you're right. Nothing new under the sun. Call it by a different name sometime, but nothing new under the sun. But she considered him a prophet. And then it goes, Our father worshiped in this mountain, and ye say that in Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship. Uh, Joel, if you don't mind, Judges 9, verse 7. Judges 9, verse 7. Okay, so one place will translate the mountain that they're on as Ebal, but this one, as Joel read in Judges, puts it back to Gerizim. But anyway, in the Old Testament, had they not built altars on the mountain as the place to go and worship? Now, why all of a sudden is she saying that the place to worship is in Jerusalem? Because that's where the temple was built. As it traveled, and finally the last place they built the temple was in Jerusalem. They had all these synagogues that they could go to and read and study, but the one place they had to go to 3 times a year to offer sacrifices was the temple, which was in Jerusalem. Could a Samaritan easily go to Jerusalem and worship? Would they have been accepted in the temple? Not the way the Jewish people talked about them. Yes.
This woman was talking about not being accepted. You think she was half Jewish, partially Jewish because of the intermarriage and everything between Jews and non-Jews in that area? So maybe that she was, so she knew of the, she was at least part Jewish because of maybe her family. That's how she knew all that. Because it almost seemed like she said to Jesus, "You're a Jew, you know, and this is where you say you go worship." But she also calls, you know, Jacob her father as well. So it's a sort of a half.
Personally, I believe that she was of the Jewish descent, which tribe, no way of knowing, but because Jacob the father, it leads you down that road, uh, because she is referring a lot back to that. Uh, Her husband's maybe not that area, but at least she had some knowledge there. And Jesus then said unto her, Woman, believe me, the hour cometh when ye shall neither in this mountain nor yet at Jerusalem worship the Father. Would that not be a strange message to receive? She's sitting there saying, you're a prophet. You're from God. And then all of a sudden, and she just explained to him that we once used to worship here, but now you tell us we got to worship there. And then all of a sudden, this, what she thinks is a prophet, says, it's coming very soon where you don't go to either one of those places to worship. What you think's rattling around in her head right now? He continues by saying, you worship ye know not what. We know what we worship, so for salvation is of the Jews. Now, he's chastising her a little bit here. And what manner, what way is he chastising her? What she's worshiping and her lifestyle, because when he says that we know what we worship for salvation is of the Jews, what is he telling her?
Actually, I think in a sense here, he's still being a prophet because salvation is of the Jews, because salvation will come through him. And I'm not sure if he's trying to tell her that, hey, go down here to the temple, which obviously he would have then because he's still under the old law, but I think he was going further down than that because he was of the Jews, and that was salvation was going to be of the Jews. So I think he was sort of laying the groundwork.
Everything came through. Well, in the Old Testament, the Jews were the favored people. When we get to the New Testament, where was the gospel first to be taught? Jews. And then it spread from there. So, to me, in essence, what he is telling her here is that you've been telling me that this is Jacob's well. You've been telling me that you used to worship here, and now you're told you got to worship here. Woman, you're no longer a true Jew. You have strayed so far into this area that it's the Jews that salvation comes through, not what you're doing. You don't even know what you're doing, meaning you're doing it in. How many people today in the religious world could we actually say that you don't know what you're doing? The vast majority. A lot of them that don't know what they're doing, don't know why they're doing what they're doing, as Kay said, and that also is quite true. And then in verse 23, he says, But the hour cometh, and now is, when the true worshipers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for the Father seeketh such to worship him. Now he's starting to sort of transition her into the, hey, it used to be this way, but it's going to be this way. And who is the true worshiper today? The worshiper of Christ. Is it Jew or Greek or Gentile or Christian? And what is a Christian? Somebody that obeys Christ's command, but why do they do it? Through obedience and faith. And where does that come from? I'm sorry? From hearing? Y'all are going all around what I want you to get to.
I will say the word itself is the word of
Romans 1:16 tells us that the gospel is the way of salvation. Ezra 7:10, how did Ezra prepare himself to go seek the law? Prepared his heart. If we truly follow Jesus today, why do we do it? How many people intellectually know what they're supposed to do, but emotionally fail to do it? Because their desires are greater than the truth. They want to do what they want to do. Part of that has to do with how many people in the world today believe in universalism. There's no hell, there's a heaven. No matter how we live, when we die, we're all going to heaven because God is good, God is great, God is merciful. Verse 24, God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. And that's the part where I think that most of the people today miss the boat. I would venture to say that of all the religions in the world today, that they worship in spirit. But the part that they fail on is worship in truth. Because as we've said, there's so many out there today that worship incorrectly, and many of them don't know why. Many of them just listen to the person up here without reading and studying on their own. The woman then saith unto him, I know that Messiah cometh, which is called Christ. When he is come, he will tell us all these things. So she thinks that she's talking to a prophet. She knows that the Messiah is going to come. She knows that the Messiah is going to be called Christ. But at this point right here, she still hadn't got a clue that she is talking face to face with the Messiah. And then look at the next verse. Jesus saith unto her, I that speak unto thee am he. You know, if I'd been sitting there talking to him that way and said, I know it's coming, and he had told me that, I think I'd have just had to reach down and pick up my jaw and put it back in place. Wouldn't that have been an awesome thing to hear? You sitting here knowing that this is going to happen, and then all of a sudden, there he is. Question? Right. Yeah. However that saying goes, that's true saying, right? I agree with you. And personally, this is a little off topic, but personally, I believe it's getting worse in that area because today everybody is in too much of a hurry. We've got all the electronics, we've got all this that we rely on. The old saying used to be, stop and smell the roses. How many people today even slow down? Good. I tell you what, that's the best way to do it, sitting out in the woods by yourself. I used to get that way when I'd go fishing. I used to fish at night all the time because I didn't like fishing in the daytime. In the daytime, you got all them partiers out there and the skiers and the people running up and down the river. But come about 9 o'clock at night when it's nice and dark, they all out of the way. You go out there in the middle of the lake at night fishing, and you just look up and see all them stars and all that nature, and you hear a little hooty owl over here or something else. It's just so calming and so relaxing, and it's you know that though. So the only time I was ever startled fishing at night, it wasn't Bigfoot, but I'm sitting there in that nice, serene, calm, fishing, minding my own business, out of sight over here, about 10, 15 feet off the bow of the boat. a beaver comes up and slaps his tail on the water. That will get your attention. He tried it a second time, but I knew he was there then, so it didn't bother me. But then in verse 27, after he had told her who he was, and upon this came his disciples and marveled that he talked with a woman. Yet no man said, what seekest thou, or why talkest thou with her? They had enough respect for Christ that they wasn't going to challenge him, even though nobody talked to them people. Here Christ is having a conversation with her, and when the disciples come up, they just leave it alone. Well, it'd been a Samaritan, yeah. Yeah, it wasn't talking to a woman. It would have been talking to, even though it says that here, that there's still, it's the Samaritan part that would be the issue. The woman then left her water pot and went her way into the city and saith unto the men. She got so excited from knowing that she was talking to the Messiah that she didn't even bother to draw water. She just left everything there and went back to the city to tell folks about it.
First time I think of Matthew 4:20, but then they straightway left their nets and followed him. You know, their nets were very, very important to them. They just left them. And same thing here. As you said earlier, they brought their own water pot and all that rope that they had to have. That certainly was a valuable thing. But she left.
Well, I know it can't happen. It's only going to happen when the end of the world comes and Christ comes back. But if it could happen, what would we do if he walked in the back door and started talking to us and wanted us to do something? And we knew it was him. Wouldn't we get just as excited? So to me, it's here that she is just truly excited and left her water pot and went. And then verse 29, it says, come see a man which told me all things that ever I did. Is not this the Christ? She was not asking this as a question. They use this kind of language, but in essence, what she was saying, come see a man which told me all these things. He is the Christ. So she's identifying to them who it is. Now, do you think they believed her? Did they believe Mary, or when they went back to tell the disciples that Christ had risen, did they believe her, that the tomb was empty? So here they're not going to believe her just based on what she says. And when we get to the end, we'll find that out. But here, verse 30 says, then they went out of the city and came unto him. In the meanwhile, his disciples prayed him, saying, Master, eat. But he said unto them, I have meat to eat that ye know not of. Now, the natural question would be, where's he gotten his food? But what food is he talking about? Is he talking about physical food? He's talking about spiritual food. It never ceases to amaze me how the disciples, especially those that became his apostles, can be with him 3.5 years and still have so little understanding until the day of Pentecost, when
He can tell us what that meat is later on in the reading. He tells exactly what it is.
Now we think that in this world today, we think that we are smart. We think we're smarter than anybody that's ever lived before us. But put yourself in that place. You're walking and talking with him. He's teaching. He's trying to tell you what's going on. You know the old scripture. You know that somebody's coming. He tells you he's it. He does all these miracles and things. But still, wouldn't there be that little hint of doubt? It's never happened before. Natural question would be, why am I so blessed to be with this character? Is it really true? Wouldn't there be at least twinge of doubt until things had happened. I think so. Our time is up. We can pick up here Wednesday night. I doubt very seriously if Terry will be back, so I'll probably be teaching Wednesday night. We'll pick up here. But thank y'all so much for your comments and attention.